Have you ever seen someone get humiliated, but stay calm so calm it scared you? That's what happened that morning at Gate 24 of Denver International Airport. At first glance, she looked like any other well-dressed passenger, a tailored navy coat, a silk scarf tucked just so, and a rich mahogany carry-on rolling behind her. She walked with the kind of elegance you don't learn, you inherit it. But the moment she spoke, the air around her changed, not for the better. Her name was Elise Monroe, and what happened to her in the next 30 minutes would leave an entire industry shaking. But no one knew that, yet not the gate agent, not the manager, not the line of impatient travelers behind her. To them, Elise was just another black woman traveling alone, another name on a list, another body to redirect. Elise stood at the check-in desk, her voice smooth, calm, articulate. "Good morning. I'm confirming my seat 2A, first class." The woman behind the counter, Chloe, her name tag read, didn't respond right away. She just blinked, glanced at Elise's skin, then at her ID, then back to the screen. And then she laughed. "Just a breath? Quick? Cold?" "Oh, Chloe said, her lips tugging into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There seems to be a change. You've been reassigned to economy, seat 44E. A pause. Elise didn't flinch. "I booked 2A weeks ago, paid in full." Chloe's fingers clacked across the keyboard. "These things happen. Sometimes the system auto-corrects. Maybe it flagged a mismatch somewhere. Happens more than you think." She smiled again, this time a little tighter, like she was enjoying it. Elise knew that smile. She'd seen it in boardrooms, at country clubs, during investor dinners when someone mistook her for the event planner instead of the keynote speaker. That smile that says, "You don't belong, but I'll pretend you do for now." She could feel the shift behind her line growing impatient, the subtle sighs, the side glances. A man in a golf cap muttered, "Can we just go?" Someone else rolled their eyes. The hum of the airport moved on, oblivious. But Elise stood still. She wasn't just angry, she was aware. This wasn't about a seat. It was about a decision made in 3 seconds flat, about what people see and don't see when a black woman asks for what she paid for. It wasn't new. Elise had traveled to 12 countries this quarter alone. She ran one of the largest private equity firms no one ever talked about by design. She moved quietly, efficiently, and that was her greatest power, being underestimated. But this time, someone made a mistake. Chloe turned her attention to the next passenger, a man with wrinkled shorts and a crumpled boarding pass. She greeted him with a bright voice, full of hospitality. Elise hadn't moved. Her hand tightened on the leather handle of her suitcase, but her expression didn't change. Then she asked one simple question. "Is there a supervisor I can speak to?" Chloe blinked again, visibly annoyed, then tapped her earpiece. "Yeah, I have someone here. She's asking for a supervisor." "Yeah, just send someone." She said it like Elise was a problem, a delay, not a person. Minutes passed, no one came. A young employee barely out of college, from the look of him, approached hesitantly. Lucas. His eyes darted to Elise, then away. I just heard. They said you were too high profile for first class." Elise looked at him. "I'm sorry?" He leaned in slightly, lowered his voice. "Someone said you don't fit the brand image. Better to move you, where fewer people might see you." The air went silent inside her. For a second, Elise felt nothing. Not rage, not sadness, just focus. She nodded slowly, said nothing. Lucas looked guilty, terrified, even, but he didn't retract his words. Elise's phone buzzed in her pocket. One word flashed on the screen. "Ready." It was a signal, from her team, a quiet green light. And with that, she knew this wasn't about reacting anymore. This was strategy. This was evidence. So she waited, silently, observing, watching every smirk, every look, every word they said or didn't say. And by the time they realized what she was doing, it would be far too late. Because Elise Monroe wasn't just a passenger. She was the storm they never saw coming. The airport kept humming indifferent, efficient, polished. Gate 24, like every other gate, was a miniature machine. People processed, boarded, moved along. But one person wasn't moving. Elise Monroe sat quietly off to the side, not in defiance, not in defeat in calculation. Her seat was gone, her dignity dismissed. And still, no supervisor had arrived. Chloe had moved on, calling names, smiling at other passengers, laughing with a man in business class whose shoes were untied and whose breath smelled of gin. She didn't glance at Elise again. But Elise watched her, every movement, every false kindness, every lie. Behind the counter, Lucas tapped nervously at his terminal. He kept glancing over at Elisa then away. His fingers fumbled. A seat change here, an override code there. His training didn't cover this. Not the feeling in his chest, the knowledge that he had become a cog in something ugly. Beside him, Chloe whispered something to a fellow agent. Elise couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. Dismissal, irritation, mockery. It wasn't loud, that's what made it dangerous. The discrimination here was subtle, systematic, and silently agreed upon. It wasn't shouted, it was shrugged. Passengers passed Elise by like she was invisible. Some glanced at her coat and raised eyebrows. Others avoided eye contact completely. One woman muttered under her breath, "She should just let it go." But Elise? She was recording everything not with her phone, but with her mind. She memorized their patterns, the way the staff reassigned another man's economy seat to first class right in front of her. The way Chloe leaned in closer when the passenger was white and male, how her tone softened like butter on toast. Across the terminal, a young flight attendant moved with sharp, practiced steps. Grace, she had witnessed the interaction earlier but said nothing. She hadn't smiled at Elise, hadn't scowled either. Just passed by like Elise was scenery. But Elise had noticed the tremble in her fingers. The young woman had paused, for just a moment near the boarding bridge. She'd looked back, hesitated, and then kept walking. Elise didn't judge her. Not yet. She understood the cost of speaking up, of going against the script. Because silence in places like this isn't just protection, it's policy. Still, that moment stuck with Grace. She straightened her uniform, adjusted her badge, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had cracked. A mirror had been held up and she hadn't liked what she saw. Back at the counter, Lucas whispered again to Chloe. "She's still waiting," he said. Chloe didn't look up. "She can wait all day. You think anyone cares?" Lucas didn't answer. Because deep down, he wasn't sure anymore. 15 minutes passed. Passengers boarded. The gate clock ticked on. No one came for Elise. Not security, not management, not customer service. Because this wasn't considered an emergency. And Elise, she let it unfold, quietly, without protest, because she had something stronger than outrage, influence. She checked her phone again. This time, a full thread of messages had arrived. From her legal team, her COO, her PR lead, her travel alliance coordinator. She read each message with surgical calm. Confirmed. Rebooking all executive travel away from this airline. Legal draft is ready, holding for go-ahead. Vendor retraction notice prepared. Press is on standby, but you call the shot. She didn't reply. Not yet. Because Elise Monroe didn't just react, she orchestrated. And while Chloe and her team smirked behind their counter, the structure beneath their feet had already begun to shake. Grace passed by again, her eyes accidentally meeting Elise's. This time, Elise smiled. Not sweetly, not bitterly, just knowingly. And Grace looked away. Not because she didn't care, but because she did. Somewhere deep inside, Grace realized this wasn't over. Something was coming. She could feel it. She just didn't know how close it was. The final boarding call echoed through gate 24. Last call for flight 318 to New York. Final boarding for all remaining passengers. The line had thinned. Most travelers had already disappeared down the jet bridge, rolling suitcases and crumpled magazines in hand. Chloe leaned back in her chair, casually sipping a paper cup of coffee, her fingers dancing idly across the keys. Lucas stood stiff beside her, his jaw tight. Elise Monroe was still seated. Still watching. Still waiting. Her presence, unmoving yet unbothered, began to draw quiet attention. A man in a suit glanced her way, then quickly looked down at his phone. A mother tugged her child away after the little girl had wandered too close. Even the nearby security officer, bored and half-scrolling through his tablet, noticed how calm she remained, how unnervingly composed. Chloe turned to Lucas and smirked. Guess she figured it out by now. Maybe next time she books her seat properly. Lucas said nothing. He couldn't, because his phone had just buzzed. An internal staff alert. Code. Flagged account Coleman Global Executive. He blinked, froze, reread the message. Then looked up. Coleman Global. The name hit him like a gut punch. Every employee in this terminal had heard of the firm. They were more than just high-profile clients. Coleman executives flew private when needed, but when they booked commercial, they expected and received unspoken red carpet treatment. Why? Because they owned parts of this airline's international logistics partnerships, because their board had seats on joint ventures, procurement deals, and loyalty program designs. Because when Coleman pulled out of a partnership, entire regions lost revenue, and Elise Monroe was on that list. He looked at her again, not at her coat or her calm demeanor, but her name, her face, her patience. It wasn't patience, he realized. It was power, power that had been waiting. His throat went dry. We need to fix this. Chloe blinked. Fix what? Lucas turned his screen, showed her the alert. She went pale. Number? That can't Besh didn't say anything. Elise rose to her feet. Slowly. Gracefully. She didn't storm the counter. She didn't raise her voice. She just walked forward, coat buttoned, suitcase rolling behind her like thunder on wheels. Miss Monroe, Lucas started, his voice shaking slightly. I just got word. There seems to have been a... But Elise held up a hand. He stopped mid-sentence. She looked at Chloe. Not with malice, not with pity. Just recognition. Do you know, Elise said softly, what it feels like to be erased before you even speak? Chloe's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I do, Elise continued. And so do millions of others. This wasn't about a seat, or a mistake. This was about who you expected to belong in that seat and who you decided didn't. I didn't mean, Chloe began. Elise didn't flinch. I know what you meant. The terminal had quieted. Grace stood frozen by the bridge, her hands gripping the clipboard so tightly the edges bent. She couldn't look away. I don't need an apology, Elise said. I don't need a seat. I don't even need this airline. She leaned slightly forward. But you need Coleman. Lucas swallowed hard. And then Elise turned and walked away. Not toward the gate. Toward the exit. Chloe stared after her, stunned. Lucas sat down heavily, his hands trembling over the keyboard. And Grace followed. Not physically, but with her eyes. Something inside her, something long buried beneath training and fear was cracking open. Elise didn't raise her voice. She didn't call the press. She didn't tweet. But within minutes, the system started to shake. By the time Elise stepped into her black SUV waiting at the curb, her phone buzzed again. A message from her assistant. All partnerships suspended, PR team on silent standby, contracts flagged, executives notified. She replied with one word. Proceed. By nightfall, Denver International Airport was still operating, but no one behind the scenes was calm. The lounge was full, the flights were running, but a chill had settled through every executive email chain, every operations report, every unreturned voicemail, because Coleman Global had gone silent, and everyone in corporate knew what that meant. Silence was not peace, it was preparation. At HQ, upper management scrambled. Chloe Patterson had been pulled into an emergency debriefing. She sat stiff in a cold glass room, fingers locked together, her voice cracking as she tried to explain away Elise Monroe's reassignment. I didn't know who she was, she said. She didn't say. She didn't act like. One of the executives cut her off. She didn't have to. That's the point. Her mistake hadn't been a technical error. It had been systemic arrogance. Meanwhile, Lucas submitted his incident report line by line, clinical, precise, every override code, every policy gap, every seat reassignment made out of bias disguised as protocol. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just told the truth. Across the break room hallway, Grace sat alone, staring into her tea, the smell of citrus and shame swirling upward. She had spoken to her supervisor. Quietly, honestly, she admitted what she'd seen. What she hadn't done, I didn't stop it, she'd said, but I knew it was wrong. Her voice had barely been audible, but the words stuck. In Elise Monroe's office, far from the airport, high above the city, things were moving faster. Her legal team had finished the full contract withdrawal. Her PR division had compiled a timeline, complete with evidence. Her operations team had begun a quiet shift, rerouting all travel, freezing co-branded programs, flagging internal partnerships for ethics review. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing it because this couldn't happen again to her, or to anyone who didn't look the part. No press conference, no Instagram post, just a silent, irreversible pull of influence. A withdrawal of trust. In the weeks that followed, the consequences unraveled like seams. Coleman's absence caused cascading disruptions. The airline lost access to elite vendor contracts. 2 premium-class sponsors backed out quietly. A board member resigned under internal review. Customer trust slipped, one delayed flight at a time. But Elise didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. Because her goal wasn't destruction, it was transformation. 1 month later, in a quiet lodge nestled in the Colorado mountains, Elise hosted a closed-door summit. Not for show, not for headlines. She invited 15 people CEOs, nonprofit leaders, operational directors, equity consultants, and 3 airline staff, including Grace. Grace walked in uncertain, her hands clasped tightly, her posture stiff. Elise greeted her with a single nod. No judgment, no condescension, only space. Over 2 days, they built something. They tore apart old policies, redesigned traveler protection standards, drafted accountability chains where silence wasn't survival but complicity. And then Elise stood at the end of the final day, looking out at the circle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for applause. She simply said, "The systems we operate within must be strong enough to withstand bias and flexible enough to correct it. We don't need more apologies. We need redesign. We don't fix this with outrage. We fix it with structure, clarity, and refusal. Not just to speak, but to act." Grace teared up quietly. Others took notes. No one interrupted. Because when Elise Monroe spoke, people didn't just listen. They reflected. Back in Denver, Gate 24 remains. Still polished, still busy. But it's different now. New training rolled out. New standards implemented. And an unspoken name behind it all. Elise Monroe. Not a passenger. Not a complaint. Not a victim. A force. So, if you've ever been silenced, brushed aside, made to feel invisible, remember Elise. And remember, you don't have to yell to bring the house down. Sometimes, you just have to walk out quietly and let the cracks do the rest.